When are the French going to give the Haitians their $30 billion back that they extorted? Now, to the credit of the French, there are people in France who are advocating for this very thing. Give them their money back. Give it back to them. But do you want to know the mind of the government? You want to know how they feel about it? The idea of giving back the $30 billion that they stole?
I hope this is worth it.
To paraphrase their response, nigga, please. That was actually the official response from the French government. Nigga, please. Actually, in French, it's nigga, s'il vous plaît, nigga. Yeah. So, when are the Haitians going to get their $30 billion back? When? Trump says it's all context behind reparations, the same globally. Does the N-word make you uncomfortable, Sam? Are you saying nigga makes you uncomfortable? Samuel, I'm saying nigga deliberately to make you uncomfortable. Do you know why? Because the word nigga was the word assigned to black people by their European colonizers. Black people didn't give themselves that title. They didn't give themselves the title of being black either. These were assigned seats. So when I say nigga, I'm doing that deliberately to invoke within you the same sentiment that was in the mind of the European colonizers when these things happened. You understand? The morning Yamashi. One person says, is affirmative action considered a form of reparations? Well, what we're talking about now is we're talking about the reparations that were paid to France by the Haitians. You have to remember something, gentlemen. Haiti is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. It's the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. It's the second poorest country in the world. Did you know that? And it's right here, a few hours off the coast of Florida. Despite this, the headlines are dominated with talk of Ukraine. How many thousands of miles away is the Ukraine? Yet look at the obsession. Why not be obsessed with the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere that was made poor deliberately by your NATO nations? Why?
I'll see to it.
Well, I'll tell you why. It's the same reason why a little Hispanic child, if he speaks English and Spanish, is considered I'll ask you, when you see a little Hispanic child and he speaks English and he speaks Spanish, what comes to mind? A bilingual Hispanic child.
I punch.
Or even a bilingual Asian child. What comes to mind? What do you think of? Now, I want you to compare those feelings to how you feel about a child who speaks English and German, or a child who speaks English and French, or a child who speaks English Generally, if you speak English and another European language, you are considered to be wise, intelligent, precocious. But what about a child here in North America who speaks English and Spanish? or perhaps English and Haitian Creole, or perhaps English and Vietnamese, or English and Mandarin. How do you feel? It's not quite as impressive. I mean, just look at the school system. In America, why is there such an obsession? What are the most dominant languages? What region of the world do the most dominant languages on this planet come from? Where? I'll give you a hint. There's someone in chat now whose name gives you a clear indication of which continent the most dominant languages on the planet come from. Asia. Asia. Do you know how many people live in Asia? Do you know how many people live in Asia? So why is it that when you go to school, you're not taught Mandarin? Beside. You can get all kinds of classes on French, German, but how many high schools have programs that teach Mandarin? Why the obsession with Eurocentric languages and culture?
Not words!
Why? When we look at the dominant languages on the planet, it would make more sense for every school in America to have a program that teaches Mandarin or Hindi. But do we see that? No, we don't, do we? In fact, what we see in America is encouragement against speaking such languages. I mean, look at America. We share a border with Latin America. I mean, literally, North America is connected to South America. I mean, your high school programs, your middle school, even your elementary school programs should be dominated with Spanish-speaking programs to teach young people to speak Spanish. But that's not the case, is it?
Give me some direction.
Why? It's not your fault. Why? It's not your fault. It's simply because the world is enamored, captured
Make your servant awake.
by Europe. This obsession continues to today. We are dominated. We are dominated by it. It's almost as if the colonial age never ended, because here America goes again, serving the interests, not of Americans, but of Europeans. When will this stop? When will this stop? When will the world finally take Europe off of life support and turn its attention to others? I'll leave that question to you. We're going to move on now. Let's talk about narcissism. Quick question. What is a narcissist? Tell me what you know, Flatsback. Well, that is incorrect. There are not enough teachers that have skills to teach that subject. Why, Flatsback? Why in 2022 does America still lack enough teachers to teach Chinese or Mandarin? Why? Brandon says, someone who only cares about themselves. Okay. Someone who is self-obsessed. See, Moneybun says because it's not relevant to American citizens. Okay, you're saying that speaking Mandarin is not relevant to American citizens. I want you to hold that thought. I want you to hold that thought. And I want you to think of this. China is the fastest growing country, not just of our era, but of any era. When you look at the growth that China has experienced in the past 60 years, it's unrivaled, not just now, but at any time in human history. This is going to continue. It's going to continue. No country has ever developed as fast as China. So if we don't shift our focus away from Europe, away from our Eurocentric focus, in 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, Americans will not be able to compete in a world that is dominated by China. They will not be able to compete because they won't know the language, they won't know the culture, they won't know the history. They'll still be speaking French and German when the world is dominated by China. And I'll tell you this much, learning Chinese, learning Mandarin is not quite as easy as learning the Romantic languages of Europe. This is something that we should start doing now. This is something that should start happening now. See, the reason why America is behind the pale when it comes to this is because for years after America's inception, instead of embracing our Asian and Pacific Islanders, what did America do? America did the exact opposite. It put laws in place to limit the interactions, to limit the movement, the input, and the participation of Asians and Pacific Islanders, including putting limits on how they could speak their language. America did not embrace Asians and Pacific Islanders in the beginning. They did not. Does anyone here remember what the Gentleman's Agreement was? Does anyone here remember the Gentleman's Agreement of 1907? This was an agreement between the American government and the Japanese government. It was an agreement on the part of the American government to treat the Japanese better than America, to give them a little bit more, in exchange for Japan to limit the number of Japanese coming to the United States. This is the story of America. The story of America is not one of embracing outsiders. It's one of choosing selectively who will be allowed in, which was typically so-called white Europeans who were Christian, Protestant Christian, not any of those filthy Catholics, right? Just Protestant Christians. So what has to be done now? That's why so much work has to be done now to change the cultural and social momentum that's been generated. Can we get some F's in the chat? Can we get some F's in the chat for our Asian and Pacific Islander brothers and sisters? Real talk. Can we get some F's in the chat for our Asian and Pacific Islander brothers and sisters? So often overlooked, right? In this world of diversity and multiculturalism, it's so often framed as a black and white issue, isn't it? Blacks and whites and blacks and whites and blacks and whites. We forget all about our beautiful Asian and Pacific Islanders. Let's talk about our Pacific Islander men. You want to know one of the most... I'm not a Pacific Islander, nor am I an Asian, but I've done quite a bit of work with that community, the Pacific Islander and Asian community. And you want to know one of the most frustrating things that I hear among Pacific Islander and Asian men, my work with them. The one thing I hear about most often is what they consider to be the glass ceiling. Now, when we talk about glass ceilings, we generally are talking about women in America. The perception that there's an invisible barrier that's preventing women from making progress. But this also applies to our Asian and Pacific Islander brothers. See, the stereotype that's been floated around concerning them is that Asian men are weak. Have you heard that? Give me a 1 in the chat if you've ever been exposed to that stereotype, that Asian men are weak. Asian men are weak. Have you ever heard that before? They're weak, short, little dicks. You heard that? Don't lie to me. I know you have. Give me a 1 if you're willing to admit you've said it, but have you heard it before? Have you been exposed to that? I've been exposed to that. This is incredibly frustrating for Asian and Pacific Islander men because they are not weak. They're none of that, but that's the stereotype. This stereotype has its origin in European colonialism because that was the perception that Westerners had of Asian and Pacific Islander men, that they were weak, they were small, they were fragile, they can't fight. And here we are in 2022 carrying on that legacy to the disappointment of our Asian and Pacific Islander friends, our brothers and sisters. They are our brothers and they are our sisters. So one thing I've noticed is that a lot of Asian and Pacific Islander men specifically, we'll talk about the women here in a second, but our Pacific Islander men, here's what will happen to them. They'll go to college, they'll work hard, they'll get the good grades, they'll graduate, they'll get in at the ground level of a company, and they'll work their way up to middle management. But then it stops.
There are things in these tanks.
Stops there.
They used to be.
They can't get into those upper positions. And it's not because they're stupid. It's not because they're not smart. It's because their perception of Asian men is that they are weak. They are weak. We can't put you in any of those positions because you're too passive, right? You're too submissive. You're weak. So they get overlooked. They get over, and that's not fair. That's not fair. And it's incredibly frustrating for them. I would imagine that it's similar to maybe the pain I might feel when people are surprised that I speak English beyond the 5th grade level. Oh my God.
If I have to fight to get out of here,
You graduated high school. Just like black people are expected to be stupid. Expected to be stupid. Asian men are expected to be weak. And because of this, they are overlooked. Overlooked when it comes to moving into those positions of senior management. There's also the perception that Asians are a model minority. Have you heard of that before? This is still on the internet. Do a Google search of model minority.
If I have to fight to get out of here, so be it.
You know what I'm talking about. Now, you might think that this is a good thing. You might think that this is a good thing. They went on a just chatting thought stream. Why are you calling her that? Why are you doing that? Why would you disrespect her like that? That's rude. What did she do to you? What did she do to deserve you calling her that name? Did she disrespect you? So why are you disrespecting her? That's not very nice. That's pretty rude, brother. She was very polite to me. She was very polite to me. And we had a very polite, non-sexual conversation. It was weird for you to project your sexual ideation.
My blade will cut you down to size.
And pretty disrespectful to call her out of her name. I'm going to go ahead and take your voice away. I don't appreciate you disrespecting our fellow streamers who have been polite. So,
Rinse and booze and
that's not very
jump on my sword while you can. I won't be as gentle.
Come on now. Come on now. I don't want you suffering. If I have to fight to get out of here, so be it.
And moderators, go ahead and take that man's voice away. I don't know.
I agree.
Yeah, the last thing I'm going to allow you to do is come in here and disrespect somebody. So you can watch the rest of the stream
What do you
in
want?
silence until you learn some manners.
Good to go.
Anyway, back to what we were talking about.
Give me some direction. Let's do this.
Yes.
Quickly.
Pacific Islander and Asian brothers. Let's go back. The perception is that this is not.
I'm waiting.
They are not.
Every hamster has
Slight
his day.
but this is a stereotype. Now, another stereotype that's associated with our Asian and Pacific Islander brothers and sisters is being a
Live
model
by the sword. Live a good long time.
What is a model minority? A model
She reminds
minority
me
is
so
a
much of
position
Candle
that
Cake.
is assigned
Dusty old tomes all
by
over.
Eurocentric
Bookcases nearly
societies
spilling.
that says this is how all other minorities should behave. Now, is that a good thing? What do you think? Should Asians feel complimented to be called the model minority? What do you think? If you were an Asian, you are a minority in America, would you feel complimented to be called a model to all other minorities? If you would be flattered by that, give me a 1 in the chat if that would be flattering to you. If that would not be flattering to you, give me a 2 instead. Thank you for being honest, ID. ID says he would feel complimented. Okay. Anyone else? Would you feel complimented? I'll tell you why that's not a compliment. First and foremost, it gives the idea that people are happy to be left out and overlooked. Second, it makes Asians and Pacific Islanders targets. It makes them targets by other minority groups. I'll say it again. The most devastating thing about being told you are a model minority is because it puts a target on your back. Thank you for the 38 months. Au revoir. Thank you for the 38 months. Thank you for the 38 months. It makes you a target. Put the target on your back. Now, how is that? Well, imagine going to a prison, gentlemen. Imagine going to a jail. Okay? And in the jail,
Not a concern.
everyone's locked up. Everyone is restricted.
Yes.